Have you ever watched The Fast and the Furious but wished it was a little bit more kid-friendly? Yeah, us neither, but surprise, surprise, us 90s kids actually had our very own Fast and the Furious back in the day. We're talking about biker mice from Mars. Here, we have 3 alien rodents riding motorcycles and trashing the corporate overlords on Earth with their cool stats maxed out. This show was a weird hybrid of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Mad Max with heavy environmental awareness. This cartoon was everything. It was the show on Saturday mornings back in 1993, but nowadays we barely hear a peep about it, so you gotta wonder, what happened to biker mice from Mars? Before we get into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to the channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. To understand what happened, we'd have to go back in time, specifically to the early 90s. You know how people say they don't make cartoons like they did back in their days? That's because the early 90s was an amazing time where every cartoon executive was trying to create that one perfect TV show that would be an instant hit, just like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles were. Everyone wanted what that show had, and that was when Rick Unger showed up. For those who don't know, Rick Unger was an entertainment lawyer who wanted to become a producer. Now, Rick had a good idea about what the kids wanted. Kids liked explosions, kids liked aliens with an attitude, and kids loved bikes. With those 3 things mashed together, Biker Mice from Mars was born. The show premiered in 1993 on Fox Kids and told the story of Vinny, Moto, and Throttle. They were 3 bike-riding, wisecracking, buff mice who hailed from Mars. Their planet was ravaged by Plutarchians, fish-faced aliens who were hell-bent on mining the galaxy for resources. So, without much choice, the 3 mice escaped to Earth. Instead of landing in LA or New York, these 3 mice ended up in Chicago, and somehow, think about it, Chicago happens to be the right place to fight off corporate fish dudes. The plot sounds bonkers, but trust us, it's bonkers in the best way possible. Even without us spelling it out, we're sure you've already figured out that the Plutarchians are barely veiled jabs at real-life corporate overlords. They simply want to exploit every planet in their path for every last drop of natural resources. Subtlety is not a thing in this show, and that's part of why it's so good. This show is so much more than one-liners and bikes. It was like Captain Planet for kids who preferred their knowledge on the spunkier side. It was the right balance between learning and explosions, too. The action sequences in this show would make the action sequences in Power Rangers look like tea time. We had solid sci-fi world building, laser battles, and even motorbike duels. The world had a proper history and setting behind it. Now, let's take a look at the characters, shall we? The group was led by Throttle, the tanned, sunglasses-wearing mouse, voiced by the legendary Rob Paulsen. Yup, the same guy who voiced Raphael in TMNT used the brains of the entire operation with his calm demeanor. Next up you had Vinny, voiced by Ian Ziering, who was the thrill-seeker of the group. He was flirty and swagged out, the ultimate bad boy. Lastly, we had Moto, the group's muscle, voiced by Dorian Harwood. He was big, yes, but he was absolutely gentle with a heart of gold. He also had his own robotic arm, which gives him extra cool points in our books. They all had their own bikes, gadgets, and catchphrases, and somehow it just worked out. Their chemistry was undeniable, and you could understand that these were actual characters with personalities, not some random characters cooked up just to sell merch. Speaking of merch, let me tell you, it went all out when it came to biker mice from Mars. But before we get too deep into that, let's make one thing clear. This show never treated kids like idiots. It broke the 4th wall, had clever writing, and even included sarcastic meta-humor. There were jokes in the show that made adults chuckle, hooking in the entire family whenever it aired. It also had sci-fi tropes that hardcore fans appreciate. This show wasn't just about anthropomorphic rats riding motorcycles, it was more than that. Each episode was like a mini space opera disguised as a Saturday morning cartoon, and it worked extremely well. The show ran from 1993 to 96, and as you guys know, this was the time when the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles copies flooded the media. This show was inspired by the Turtles, yes, but it still managed to make an identity for itself that a lot of shows from that time failed to do. This show had this punk sensibility that we didn't see in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. It wasn't about teamwork and sharing. This show was all about blowing up corporate oil rigs by firing missiles from a bike and dropping one-liners about corporate greed. And somehow, every kid loved it. So by the time the mid-90s rolled around, Biker Mice from Mars was riding high on Earth and in some parts of Europe, where the whole anti-corporate themes hit harder than Moto's haymaker. So yeah, this show had an international fan base even before those things were mainstream. And with that being said, let's talk toys. If the show was going 100 miles per hour, the merchandising machine for it was breaking the speed of light. We know that in the 90s, any show worth its dollar already had a rack of toys at Toys R Us, and for Biker Mice from Mars, those toys came from the company Galoob. The same company that gave us Micro Machines and Sky Dancers decided to hit the racks at your local Toys R Us with Biker Mice from Mars toys as soon as the show was popular. There were full-scale figures at the store for each character with their very own motorcycles, accessories, and weapons, as well as several different variants. So basically, you could have a normal Vinny model and then Jet Blast Battle Vinny and even Sewer Strike Vinny. And before you say that sounds like a lot of wasted money, let me tell you guys, the vehicles that came with those toys were absolutely amazing. They were actually really cool. They had sound effects, rockets, and a bunch of decals that we're sure would make a NASCAR pit crew shed a few tears. And yes, there were Plutarchian villain toys too, but we all know that the kids wanted the mice. The only reason you'd buy one of the villains was so that your moto could kick him off a roof. Wait, that wasn't all. The merchandising didn't stop there. The company also released bed sheets, Halloween costumes, coloring books, and lunch boxes for the show. The show effectively got the full multimedia treatment. Yeah, there were even video games too. In 1994, Konami released Biker Mice from Mars, the game, on SNES. Now, given the context of the show, you'd think it would be one of those fighting games, but nope. Instead, this game was one of those rock and roll racing types. It was a top-down racing game, and it kind of fit the brand perfectly. It had all the main things from the show, namely futuristic weapons, trash talk from Vinny, and explosive tracks, so no wonder everyone loved it. The game even had cutscenes with actual voiceovers, and back in those days, those cutscenes were a huge deal. There was also a Sega Genesis game, but the SNES version was cooler. The Genesis game was okay, but it didn't gain much traction because it seemed like the person who created it had never seen the show before and instead created their own alternate universe versions of the characters. But with these games, the Biker Mice from Mars exploded in Europe. Its fan base in the US was nothing compared to its fan base in the UK. The show was on rerun endlessly in the UK, with merch being sold out years after the series ended. The British kids were living that chrome and cheddar dream, and you couldn't walk into an Argos back in the 90s without tripping over Vinny or Moto figurines. The reason that the show exploded in the UK was simply because Fox Kids Europe and Sky One kept the series in constant rotation. While everyone else in the US was moving on to Pokemon and Power Rangers, European fans were still watching Biker Mice, keeping its essence alive. That's why, even to this day, you have Reddit threads popping up wondering about Biker Mice from Mars. French trading cards, VHS tapes from Poland that are definitely bootleg, German sticker albums, all these and more were available for the show simply because of how well loved it was. Another major factor in the show's popularity was the voice cast. We've already talked about the main voice actors, but check this out. Mark freaking Hamill voiced multiple characters. Brad Garrett also voiced the world's dumbest henchman, Grease Pit. Rob Paulsen managed to bring several iconic actors from that era into the show, and all of that talent would have gone to waste had the characters not been absolutely charming and lovable. Vinny, Moto, and Throttle were the characters you could look up to and connect with, and the kids truly connected with. If you're a 90s kid, we're sure that when you think of the cartoon crews of your time, you don't just think of the Gargoyles, X-Men, or the Ninja Turtles, you probably think about a couple of Biker Mice too. So, safe to say, the show that started out as a TMNT cash grab managed to make its identity and own fandom in a matter of 3 seasons. It rose quite high. We all know every roller coaster has a drop, so too did the Biker Mice. With so much merch sales and international love, Biker Mice from Mars was starting to feel invincible. Their end was near. By the time Season 3 of Biker Mice from Mars aired, there were signs everywhere making it evident that they were screwed. To start off, ratings in the US were tanked while British kids were enjoying the antics of the Biker Mice from Mars. Kids in the US were getting really tired of the genetically modified, attitude-packed animal heroes. During this time, you had shows like Street Sharks, Battletoads, and Extreme Dinosaurs that were about to be released. So you've got this many animal heroes with more and more hijinks. In comparison, Biker Mice from Mars started to feel a little tame, but that could have still been salvageable if the show had maintained everything else. Sadly, that wasn't the case. During this time, Biker Mice went through a bit of an identity crisis. Was it an environmental allegory with motor oil or a hardcore action series? Or was it neither a satire nor a vehicle for selling toys? For a while, Biker Mice tried to be all of these things together, but after a while, the balance started to tip. Some episodes leaned into the slapstick humor and puns, while the others were dark and gritty. It was like every episode was chosen based on a coin flip at random. For some kids, this was awesome. The show simply kept you on your toes, but for others, not so much. The writing also started to lose lose steam. First season, the Plutarchians were funny and interesting, but when you're on the third season and Limburger is making a dumb plan, only for the henchmen to screw it up, resulting in mice exploding stuff, you start to feel like you're stuck in a time loop. Very reminiscent of Charles Styles and his mystery diners, if you know what we're saying. Everything, from Grease Pit's banana peel slapstick to the fish puns, was starting to feel stale. And on top of that, the toy line had plateaued. Galoob had released every possible variant it could come up with in the market. The loyal toy collectors were feeling fatigued, and the company was starting to run out of ideas, especially given that this was the time when Power Rangers showed up and the Japanese imports were crashing in hard. After all, is it even worth the pocket money if the toy doesn't light up, talk, or transform? Not in our books. The final nail in the coffin came when Fox Kids decided to restructure. They wanted fresh blood, tighter branding, and shows that could go up against the anime invasion that was happening back. Effectively, a full programming glow-up. And as you guys can guess, Biker Mice didn't fit the bill. It satisfied a very niche audience, and it simply didn't fit the altogether vibe they were going for. It wasn't edgy like Batman the Animated Series, and it wasn't Digimon. The best way to describe Biker Mice would be to call it a holdover. And let's be real, no one wants a holdover, especially the execs. So, when it was time to renew the show for another season, Fox decided to pass. There was no thanks, no fanfare, nothing. One minute we had Throttle on our screen dissing Limburger, and the next week we moved on to something else, almost like Biker Mice had never existed. The merchandise sales also decreased in the US, even though abroad they still had their market. Even then, the most loyal fan could understand that the ride was ending. The worst part, creators were never given the chance to wrap things up. We have no big closure or grand ending. All we got was reruns until the show faded into obscurity. For a show that started off with so much pizzazz and fanfare, it was definitely disheartening to watch it go out with a sputter instead of a bang. But of course, this wasn't the end of the story, couldn't. So, in true 90s fashion, someone showed up to reboot the show. 2006 rolls around. The world is very, very different. High gas prices, emo haircuts, you know the deal. And then someone, somewhere in the UK, decided that what the world needed at that moment was more biker mice. And the chrome-plated Martian mice were back in our lives again, sorta. The 2006 reboot of Biker Mice from Mars has 28 episodes, and it rolled onto the screen with everything new and an aura of midlife crisis. This show made it clear that it was going to be a fresh start, reimagining, if you want to think about it that way, but boy oh boy, that show made quite a few choices. Starting off with the most obvious one, animation. The original show had a gritty, shadow-heavy, hand-drawn look that made it iconic in its own right, but this reboot had none of that. It had a digital, more polished, sleeker look. The best way we can describe it is that it's like the mice went through a Nickelodeon makeover. It wasn't bad, but it was extremely sanitized. Along with the animation, the character designs were toned down as well. The muscles were no longer as big or bulky. Vinny no longer had his roguish charm, and Moto seemed toned down and neuter. Even Throttle seemed a bit more meh. Now, some of the original voices did come back. Rob Paulson and Dorian Harewood came back to reprise their roles, but Vinny was recast. And with that recast, there came an energy shift. Gone was that iconic and ridiculous egomania that we associated with Vinny for so long. He was now simply flat. The villains also went through a reboot of their own. The Plutarchians we were so accustomed to were gone. New bad guys on the scene were the Catatonians. Any guesses what they were? Yep, they were a race of alien cats because, you know, cats versus mice. Space cats, interesting concept, sure, but when compared to the original fish-faced capitalist villains, the space cats who shoot lasers really felt like a downgrade. And that brings us to the biggest issue with the show. The reboot completely lost its attitude. The original Biker Mice had bite. The show took shots at pollution, conformity, and even big business. It was politically charged, messy, and loud, but in a kid-friendly way. It had an edge to it, but the reboot completely wiped that clean and made it the kids' Bob version. The sharp jokes and fourth wall breaks were gone, so was the sense of chaos. The storytelling lacked the punch of the original show, and suddenly we had something on our hands that sounded like Biker Mice, looked like Biker Mice, but didn't feel like Biker Mice at all. And as you can guess, this show barely made a dent. It was aired in Europe, but had no presence in the US. It wasn't on Toonami or Fox Kids. It simply existed in silence while no one was looking and then disappeared. There was no proper marketing push, no game tie-ins. Kids at that time were busy watching Ben 10 or Avatar: The Last Airbender. Fans were split over the whole thing. Some appreciated the effort and the attempt at the reboot. Others felt betrayed because this wasn't what they wanted. This brings up a question that I'm sure all of you are wondering. Was this reboot a wasted opportunity? The short answer is yeah. The reboot was polished and flashier, but that shiny veneer wasn't fooling anyone. Everyone could see that the show had lost what made the original such a fan favorite. The original gained popularity not because of the bikes, aliens, or explosions, was because of the high-octane chaos with a heart. It was the attitude, unapologetic delivery of the dialogue. And the reboot, despite having all the right pieces, had none of the fire. So in a way, this reboot was a bit of a bike wreck, but this wreck left behind a flaming tire mark, and the mice weren't completely forgotten, because, as you know, in pop culture, legends don't disappear. They go into hibernation until the world is ready for them once more, and honestly, feels like that day might be coming. Surprise, surprise, Biker Mice from Mars managed to reach cult classic status. We're talking about the I remember the show kind of classic. We're talking about dedicated fans, active Reddit threads, and a YouTube video essay talking about how biker mice deserved better, articles saying that this show was better or had more potential than any other cartoon at the time. You name it, they've got it. The show didn't have the longevity it desired on American airwaves, but it made its impact. The balance of comedy, sci-fi, campy dialogue, and environmental awareness that this show managed to achieve was never recreated by any other show after it. The characters aged like fine space cheese, with Throttle as the introvert icon, Moto as the biker dad, and Vinny being the precursor of characters like Johnny Bravo and Deadpool. That's why we believe the fandom managed to survive for as long as it did, quiet and resilient, just like the mice. Throughout the years, there have been attempts at a revival. There was a comic book relaunch in the late 2000s, but that fizzled out faster than Limburger's evil plans. So, the untapped potential of the show remained waiting. That is, until 2023. Out of nowhere, we saw Vinny doing donuts in your dining room, bringing an announcement with him. Ryan Reynolds' Maximum Effort Studio was rebooting the show. Finally, that's right, the King of Snark, the man who turned obscure pop culture into box office gold. So, if there was anyone who could pull off this chaotic gem of a show and give it the proper update it deserved, it's none other than Deadpool. The details of the show are still under wraps, but reports suggest that this new reboot will lean into the satirical and edgy tones that made the original such a hit. The show will probably be an animated, adult-friendly joyride with a lot of references that would treat the original show with reverence while poking fun at how gloriously absurd it was. And if Reynolds plays it right, this could be the comeback that no one expected, but everyone needs. In this age, nostalgia is the currency, and Biker Mice from Mars is an unmined gold reserve. So, could this be the return to glory we've been waiting for? Well, we'll have to wait and watch. But one thing we know for sure, Biker Mice from Mars isn't dead. Marvelous verdict! This show started out as a turbocharged joyride of mutant animals, but it crashed into a haze of rating fatigue and oversaturation. Then, out of nowhere, when the world wasn't ready for it, the show came back with a facelift no one asked for. After the disastrous failure of the reboot, the show waited in silence for a decade until the world was ready. And now, that time is starting to feel right. So polish up those handlebars and cue the catchphrase one more time. Let's rock and ride. Let us know what you guys think about the reboot of Biker Mice from Mars by Maximum Effort Studios in the comments down below. We want to hear if you're as excited as we are, or if there's anything in particular you want us to cover. Otherwise, thanks for watching, stay safe out there, and have a marvelous day.